There is one spreadsheet tool that is more powerful than all the others, that can give you deep insight into your farm records and can save you from the dangers of copy-pasting information from one sheet to another to another. I'm talking about pivot tables. I'm Dan Brisebois from the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy, and today I'm going to give you a pivot table primer. Let's start by looking at what we're trying to get at with a pivot table. I'm going to use an example from my crop plan template. And so this is a document that I use, or that you can use, to plan your crops for your field. The link is down below. You can go and click on it and use it. Now, the crop plan spreadsheet has all these columns where you're making all kinds of decisions with it. And this is important for the planning, but when you're actually going to be working in the field or working day to day, you actually just want a snapshot. And what you want is a calendar. So here, in this case, this is similar information to what's on the other page. There's, the crops that you're going to be growing and the weeks of the year or different dates of the year that you're going to be planting, and then how many bed feet you're planting each of those days. And you can make a calendar like this from any crop plan. And often what people do is the folks copy paste from their crop plan into a calendar like this to then have a schedule for the season. The problem with that is that it's easy to make mistakes. And then if you update your crop plan, you have to copy paste here. And so this is what a pivot table is going to do. It's going to make a dynamic report, kind of like this calendar. And as you change one thing in the crop plan, it's going to update everything in the calendar. All right, so let's look at how we make that. We'll go back to the crop plan, and I'm going to click in this little square beside A and above 1, and that selects everything on the sheet. I'm going into the menu here, and I'm going to click on Insert and scroll down to Pivot Table. I click on that, and in this case, I'm going to make a pivot table in a new sheet. And so it's Pivot Table 49, it says right here. Now, actually, go back to the crop plan. The information I want to show up in the pivot table. There's the crop here. So that's what we're growing. There is the field date, when we're planting it, and then how many bed feet we're planting in each case, in each week. So this is the information I want to show up in this pivot table. Now, in the pivot table, back to the pivot table sheet, on the far right is this editor. If I click on the little X, it closes the editor. If I want to get back to the editor, I hover over the pivot table, and there's a little pencil sign. I click on Edit, and it shows back up. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to drag the crop into the rows. And now we see the crop show up here, just like in this calendar. Next up, I'm going to want to do the columns. So I can go to the field date. Is that right? Oh, and I should have said this before. In the pivot table editor, each of these words corresponds to the header of one of the columns. And so I'm dragging the information from that column into the pivot table. So I drag the crop here, and then the next one I want is the field date is going to be my columns. So I'll grab field date to columns, and now I see that showing up right here. If I wanted to, I could highlight them all, and I could orient them upwards, and then I could shrink the cell a little bit so it takes up more space. I probably have to highlight all of them to do that. And now, so we're almost at the calendar. So we have the dates, we have the crops, and then the last thing to go in would be the bed feet each week. So we do that, and those bed feet, the bed feet have showed up over here. Now I can go in. I'm going to close this editor here. And I have my calendar based on what's in the crop plan, and these are example dates. It's not a real crop plan, but it's what's there, and it's showing what's there. And if I go in and I want to add another crop, so let's say, look at here. What's a crop that's not here? Let's say we want to plant some kale. We could go in, we could plant kale, put it in the yellow column, and I'm going to plant it on, maybe I'll go in, I'm going to plant it on July 17th, and I want to put 300 bed feet. When I go to the pivot table, there's now a row for kale, July 17th, 300 bed feet. And if I change any of the information, so here there's carrots, on April 22nd for 300 bed feet. If I go and figure out where those are, the carrots, April, is that over here? April 22nd, 300 bed feet. If I want to plant them a different day, April 26th. Now this has changed to April 26th. So with a pivot table, so I just dragged and dropped 3 things in. This pivot table appeared, and then whatever I change in that other spreadsheet will update this pivot table also. Now I can add more information if I want. So I could go in and I could pull in, if there's varieties, I could pull those in. And in the case, oh no, I want to keep the crops too. So now there's a lot of these totals here. I'm going to unclick the show totals. And I'm going to repeat row labels here. And I'm going to close this for now. And I'll expand this a bit. So here we have the crop and the variety that is being planted each week. I could also add in something I could add in. Maybe I want to also know the number of rows per bed. And I'm going to unclick the show totals. And then I want maybe the in-row spacing, if it's a transplanted crop, and the seeds per bed foot. If it's a direct seeded crop, I'll get rid of those show totals also. And now I have more information showing up here, so I could print this out and I can have that information for the field. And it has some of the key information of what I'm planting, how many seeds per row per foot, what the in-row spacing is, the rows per bed. So here I can do a lot of different things with the pivot tables to make my life easier. And it's important to realize that as I'm adjusting the pivot table, nothing is being changed in the source information. This information here behind that's generating the data, it doesn't get modified by the pivot table. So if I make a mistake with the pivot table, I am not compromising my main crop plan sheet. And so you could easily share that pivot table with somebody else, or somebody could use it to look at the data, and they're not gonna affect the information that you're starting off with. Now, one last thing you can do with a pivot table is I'll click on Edit to show the pivot table editor. There's a little section at the bottom called Filters. I'm going to go and get the crop and drag it into Filters. Now, if I want, I could go click here. I can clear all the information and just see lettuce information. So now I only see the lettuce information in this field, or in this pivot table. If I want, let's say I want to see kale and lettuce. Now I just see the kale and the lettuce. I could also get rid of that, and maybe I'll drag in the field week, or the field date. Okay, I'm going to drag in the field date, so I can add in the field date, and then I can go in, and maybe I just want to see May 15th. Click on this, and I can see there's some tomatoes I want to plant on May 15th and how many bed feet of each. So I could filter by the date and get a planting calendar for that date. So that's something else you can do with the pivot table. Now that's how I would turn a crop plan into a calendar using a pivot table. You can also use pivot tables to look at your harvest records, your sales records, anything on your in a spreadsheet. You can turn into a pivot table and look at it and get a lot more information out of it. Now, learning how to make a pivot table will give you a lot more insight into what's going on in your farm. And as you saw, it's really as easy as just dragging 2 or 3 columns into the pivot table editor to suddenly have the pivot table appear. I encourage you to go and get your crop plan or some harvest data and go make your own pivot table right after you finish watching this video. Of course, first, you got to go click and hit that subscribe button and like the post and all that. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Happy farming.